I don't know about you guys, but I just love playing NHL 94. There's something that just feels right about this game. And the presence of tons of community mods means that it's a game that simply never grows old. But there are some of you who prefer playing the later NHL games to NHL 94. Some people prefer NHL 95 or even NHL 96. In fact, there are tons of people who argue about this online even 30 years later. If you don't believe me, go Google it and you'll find the same things that I found. There's a lot of people who care about this. So let's go take a look back in time and see if we can figure out what's going on and what's better than what. When it was first released, video game magazines praised NHL 96 as one of the greatest video games of all time. In fact, many of the retrospective video game publications you'll find called the best of the 16-bit NHL era. And yet most of the community mods focus on NHL 94, not on NHL 96. Now, the more that you play these games, the more you can tell that something changed after NHL 94. And you know, this is hard to explain, so I'll tell you what, unless you got one of these in your hands, you know, one of these controllers, and you're actually playing the game, you just can't feel it. So the thing is that the first 3 games in the series made you feel like you were actually playing on ice. And that feeling went away for some reason or other once you got to NHL 95. The problem, of course, is that it's really hard to describe this to you. You know, you have to actually like play it yourself to know what I'm talking about. One of the best things about the original NHL hockey on the Sega Genesis is the way that the game flowed. You couldn't just muscle the puck up the ice, and some players were clearly faster and more skilled than others. There was a feeling in this game that you really had to fight for an offensive opportunity, and that defensive mistakes would really be costly. Of course, critics of the game will tell you that it feels a little bit slow and clunky, and it does. But the nice thing about that slower feel is that it forces you to use strategy. In other words, the game's about more than just getting one breakaway after another. This carried over into NHLPA 93, where breakaways are few and far between. While you will still see high-scoring games on occasion, defensive players will at least get back on defense. You're not looking at endless breakaways. That same focus on defense and on realism carried over into NHL 94, and it's one of the reasons why the series is so beloved to this day. And then there were the one-timers. You know that I can't make a video about this game without at least mentioning the one-timers. And I'm not kidding when I say that one-timers were extremely important to the success of NHL 94 on the Sega Genesis. This GamePro review says it all. One-timers provide an awesome thrill. It's easy to shoot one-timers, and it's an absolutely potent offensive weapon. Of course, there are a few other tricks you can do to score too. And the more that you experiment with different techniques, the more success you'll see. So that's one of the things that makes NHL 94 so special. You can do a few tricks to score, sure, but the thing is that even the trickiest plays are not necessarily going to wind up being successful. You have to worry about the defense at all times. And that's the thing that, in my opinion, went wrong with NHL 95. The first thing you'll notice about NHL 95 is that it's incredibly fast. Even your defensemen will be fast enough to skate circles around the computer-controlled defenders. This leads to a game of non-stop breakaways. And believe me when I say that some of these goals would have been absolutely impossible in the first 3 games of the series. Now, don't get me wrong, the speed is fun and all, but it can feel kind of unsatisfying. And part of the problem is that you get breakaway chances every single time you go up the ice. So I've looked around for a long time to try to figure out why in the world EA would make a change like this. Not only is that on-ice feel in the later games gone, and remember, you have to play with one of these to understand that part, but the thing is that the speed of this game makes it feel really silly after a little while. Now, I don't know that I have the perfect answer, but I think that I've got at least an idea as to why. You see, Electronic Arts first really made a name for itself with John Madden Football and the Sega Genesis back in late 1990. Madden had nice looking animation, sure, but the gameplay was extremely slow and stilted. By the time Madden 94 came out, the gameplay was a little bit faster, but it still had that really choppy feel to it. Now, my understanding is that the original NHL engine was based largely on the John Madden Football engine in terms of like speed and animations, timing, and so on. And so when EA updated the Madden engine in 1995, it was only natural that they'd make similar changes to the NHL engine, right? Except that they left out that feeling of being on the ice for some reason or other. Madden 95 wasn't exactly Sonic the Hedgehog, but it was a vast improvement over the earlier Madden games. And so if you're wondering why in the world Sega let the offense go crazy in NHL 95, well, now you know the reason. It was all in the name of speed. After all, speed is what kids cared about in the mid-1990s. Now, I don't even need to like show you guys a source for that. I mean, I can probably find it. We can go dig through all the old video game magazines from like 94, 95 and stuff. I'm going to tell you what, I was there and I remember this, right? Those were the days of like Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Those were the days of sticking turbo modes and various frame skipping tricks into video games to make them as fast as humanly possible, right? You ever play like Marvel vs. Capcom? You know what I'm talking about. Now, you can see I'm kind of slow and gray now. I probably can't keep up with all of those old games. My kids will tell you that. But I can tell you that it does feel to me like they ruined the NHL series. Now, if you play NHL 96 for just a few minutes, you'll notice the same breakaway problem. Even the slowest players on the ice have the ability to take it all the way up the ice themselves for an instant breakaway. The game feels a little bit better in the rare event that the defense can organize itself in the defensive zone. But almost every single possession in this game feels like this. It's just one breakaway after another. And the worst part here is I don't think that EA ever really fixed the issue. At least not until 2004, that is. And by that time, there'd been a ton of pressure on EA coming from other companies. Okay, I'll admit that NHL 2004 does a great job at applying pressure on the puck and preventing you from getting those crazy breakaways. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why it's often thought of as one of the best games in the series.
Through the neutral zone, Bullish, crank one, Shields made the pad save.
Look at something like NHL 97 on the PlayStation though, and you'll see tons and tons of breakaways. And maybe it's just me, but the scoring in this game just doesn't feel right. Now the great irony here is that the world of like breakaways and easy goal scoring opportunities in the actual NHL was coming to an end at the time that these games were coming out. This is the thing that people keep forgetting. You see, the breakaway era of EA's NHL games coincided with the neutral zone trap era of the NHL. The New Jersey Devils were famous for this neutral zone trap, which was all about forcing the other team into impossible offensive situations. It's not always easy to see in the era of SD coverage, but the Devils are forcing the Winnipeg Jets here into making offensive mistakes by not giving them room to pass or move through the neutral zone. The overall effect of this strategy was to eliminate all breakaways and to build to a very defensive and boring form of hockey. And all of this is a pretty stark contrast to the classic era of hockey, which is likely the era that you and I long for and want to see come back. Let me show you. In more classic games like this USA-Canada game from the 1987 Canada Cup, you can see the defense playing a little bit further back. That leads to a mistake, a missed hooking call, and a goal. If you look closely here, you'll notice that the neutral zone is basically wide open. Teams were content back then to let the offense get into its game plan first. And here's your breakaway. Maybe not as wide open as in NHL 95, but at least it looks nice. Of course, EA Sports was not exactly jumping at the chance to go recreate the neutral zone trap in its games. I mean, fans just absolutely hated this stuff. In fact, I think that fans to this day just hate the idea of the defense playing what amounts to a full court press every single time the other team brings it down the ice. After the conclusion of the ugly lockout, the story of the 1994-95 season was the growth of that neutral zone trap. And the negative news coverage of the neutral zone trap only made it less likely that EA would try to recreate it. In fact, the decline of popularity in hockey in the mid-1990s was probably due to the defensive way of playing rather than because of the labor strife. And so we had this really bizarre contrast starting in the mid-1990s. The NHL game was stalling because of these extreme defensive tactics, and yet video game hockey featured more offense than ever before. In other words, the NHL looked like this.
Kind of a quiet one so far.
And yet the video game world featured free-flowing play like this. Even NHL 99 on the N64 was a goal scorer's paradise. This was a pretty big contrast to games like Blades of Steel 99, where the neutral zone actually mattered again. But still, it wasn't until 2004 that you saw defense make its triumphant return to EA's NHL series after an absence of about 10 years. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that NHL 95 or NHL 96 are bad games. In fact, if you've never played the first 3 games, I can absolutely see you concluding that those were the best of all time. After all, those 2 games were the ones that introduced basic things like the season mode. NHL 94 let you choose a regular season game, sure, but it's really just an exhibition game. The game actually has no regular season mode. And so if you're looking to do a long-term project, you need to get one of the later games. But the thing is that if you really want a game that actually feels like hockey, you have to stick with NHL 94. Anyway, that's my opinion on this subject, but what do you think? Let me know down below and we can argue about it.